Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here at such an early hour and finding your way in this maze of allocation. I'm Luca Bertuzzi, and it is my pleasure to moderate this panel discussion on AI and the monopoly threat. We have a stellar panel here today. Kim van Sparentak, MEP, Christina Cafara, Associate Fellow at the Center for Economic Policy and Research, Max von Thun, Europe Director for Open Markets Institute, Anne Bakak, Executive Director, AI Now Institute, and Sebastiano Toffaletti, Secretary General at the European Digital SME Alliance. So we have plenty of speakers and plenty to talk about. I'll turn to you, Max, to kick off this discussion, since you organized this discussion on what has been so far perhaps the most underestimated aspect of the artificial intelligence market ever since the meteoric rise of ChatGPT. We often, when we talk about AI, we talk about risks. Some go as far as talking about existential risks, maybe to divert the attention to the risks that are occurring now. But the discussion has always been a bit on this aspect and ignoring perhaps what is the big picture here, which is how this market is increasingly concentrating in the hands of a handful of companies. So is it time to shift the focus of the conversation on AI?
Is this working? Yeah. So yeah, I mean, the short answer to your question is, I think absolutely we need to have a much bigger focus on the structure of the AI market in the policy debate. I think we need to have a much more concrete focus on the actual companies with power in this market, who are the ones who are developing and rolling out these technologies. And I think you're right that so far we haven't really seen that. I think, as you say, we've seen a much bigger focus on kind of questions of risk and of safety in the AI debate. And not to say those aren't important, but I think the question of kind of market power has been there in the background. It's alluded to sometimes, but I don't think it's really being tackled head on at the moment. Obviously, you have some kind of competition authorities and others in civil society, such as ourselves, who are talking about it. But I think it's not really part of the mainstream debate right now. And I think part of that is at least this focus on kind of safety and risk. I mean, I think part of that comes from a genuine anxiety that people have about how these technologies are going to be used, these very powerful technologies in some cases. But I do think, as you kind of alluded to, Luca, I do think it's also partly been, or largely being driven by the industry. I think, one thing which I've seen in the AI debate is this kind of pretense that AI is this, particularly generative AI, is this kind of technology that's come out of nowhere, almost by magic, and has kind of landed at our feet, and is something that we can't really do anything to stop, that we just have to adapt to. I'd call it a kind of technological determinism. And I think what that does is it obscures the very kind of specific, economic structures, economic incentives that are driving the development of this technology, and I think it hides the fact that, ultimately, again, it's a very specific, very small number of businesses who are making decisions about how this technology is being developed. And then I think linked to that, I also think we've seen, again, a pretty small number of companies try and shift the debate or have the focus of the debate be on these, what you could call existential or quite far-flung risks, in my view, often quite exaggerated risks around killer robots or AI, being used to teach people how to build nuclear weapons. I think we can't completely discount that, but I think the effect of that has often been to give this small number of companies a very privileged position in the regulatory debate, because they say to regulators, oh, our technology's so complex, it's so dangerous, you can't really figure it out without us, so we need to be there writing the regulation with you. And I think that has been, again, problematic. I think it's also distracted from some of the very concrete ways that AI is already affecting people's lives and entrenching the power of these companies kind of in the present. And so I think as a more helpful paradigm, I think we, instead of seeing AI as, again, as this completely new thing that's come out of nowhere, I think we need to look at it as something that is very much built on existing concentration in the tech sector, very extreme concentration, particularly when it comes to data, computing power, expertise, and money, basically the kind of ingredients you need to develop these cutting-edge AI models. And at the moment, those resources are held by very few companies, and that gives them a huge advantage over other players in the market. And I think what the dynamic then ends up being for those who don't have those resources, either they basically join forces with these dominant companies, but then they give up a lot of their independence, they give up their ability to really compete with them, or basically they go out of business because they don't get the computing power they need, for example. And I think what it also does is it allows those companies both themselves and through these partnerships with other firms to basically steer the direction of AI innovation overall in a way that benefits their interests and at the expense of other forms of AI. For example, I think right now there's very much an emphasis on ever bigger models rather than smaller models, and I think that is in the interests of these tech companies who have all these resources. So yeah, to go back to your original question, I think for all these reasons we need to be talking much more about market power, market structure in the AI debate.
Right, thanks, Max, for that. And we'll talk more about these partnerships later. But I want to move to Amba now because you have recently completed your term as senior advisor on AI for the US Federal Trade Commission. And I mean, I wanted to gather your reaction on what Max said. It's about market structure, existing concentration, economic incentives. What's the regulatory thinking on the other side of the pond right now?
Yeah, not actually so recently. It's been about 18 months since I left the FTC, and I will answer your question, but maybe just to react to what Max said, and because we're at CPDP, which I think has competition has maybe not been as much of a focus here, I think it's important to say that concentration of power is not a kind of competition or antitrust issue. It's much more useful to think of it as the kind of the economic and political reality within which any regulation of the tech industry is taking place. And this is not new, it is not specific to AI, but it is something that the kind of tech policy community, the civil society, research advocacy community has been relatively slower to contend with. It's always been, to your point, Max, about the, it's the background context, it's the elephant in the room, but it has always been fairly invisibilized. So I think in this particular moment where on the one side you have these grand, almost magical narratives about omniscience and the future, whether that's killer robots or it's the best thing that's ever going to happen. I think what has been far more effective to kind of pierce through the hype just as a tactical strategy has been less so conversations about rights, but much more conversations about the material realities, the incentives, infrastructures, business models that are driving this space. And so for all of these reasons, I think concentration of power as a lens and as a tactic, as a strategy has to be really up core, because I think otherwise, and as a I would consider myself very much in the community of policy wonks. I think we have a tendency to try to have an idealized setting in which we come up with these great policy ideas, but we really don't confront the more uncomfortable truths about how easily these regulations in their enforcement just become, a cost of doing business, or yet another area where kind of tech expertise, because of the massive information asymmetry, becomes yet another kind of space to capture. So with that said, but you asked me about the FTC. I think the FTC honestly was very interesting from that perspective. Some of you might know this, but the FTC is somewhat unique, although not alone in this, in that it has jurisdiction over both, or three actually, consumer protection, so deception and those kinds of issues, privacy and competition. And I think one thing that Chair Khan did very early in her term, soon after we joined actually, was say that a strategic priority needs to be to stop divorcing privacy and consumer protection from concentration and competition. These two sides of the house, and they are pretty much two sides of the house, need to be in conversation, because otherwise we are just as a kind of strategic priority in privacy, and this I'm not speaking on behalf of the Commission here, but I think there are ways in which the focus of the privacy community has often been on let's restrict access to these third-party data broker markets or third-party access to data. And the big tech firms have been very, very happy to be on this bandwagon because what it leaves untouched is their first-party data advantage. So we won't let your data leave our ecosystem, right? But we'll keep it safe and we'll keep it private, and really shaping our notion of privacy and security in ways that sort of lines up with a closed garden model. So, I mean, that's just one example, I think, of the ways in which the kind of siloing out of privacy and competition and concentration as a lens has led to, the policy community almost undercutting itself and working almost in the interests of companies more often than not.
Right. And if there is anyone that has been advocating for breaking these silos, has been Christina. And I remember we discussed extensively the Meta versus Bundeskartellamt case. And you have also been quite critical of competition enforcement that tends to arrive too late when the damage is already done. So what's your view on the current state of the AI market? Is it already too late, or is there more that the European Commission or other regulators can do?
It is too late, and there is nothing anyone can do. Can we go home now? Okay,
let's close it here then.
So let me start with my disclosures, because coming from the private sector is a matter of religion that people disclose, although I don't work for these companies anymore. In the last 3 years, I worked for Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, and I worked adverse to Google and Facebook. So with that said, I second very much the things that have been said so far, because the tech community, this community, thinks about fundamental rights, and a competition economies, the antitrust people are steeped into market power. And if you've been in a room with power, as I have, that's the engine, okay? We can have discussions about controlling what we call the application layer. I'm still amazed when I sit with people talking about AI to see how detached the discussion is from the reality. People talk about very earnestly how we control all the deception, discrimination, all of the manifestation of the problem. And the elephant in this room, which is as big as anyone can kind of fathom, is that to an antitrust person, the reality is there is a vertical supply chain. That vertical supply chain has a thing we call upstream and a thing we call downstream. Don't get confused with the ups and downs. When people talk and say downstream, you have the models. No, the models are up. The models are the input, okay? Think of an input. They are the foundation models, and that input gets plugged into the productization, the application. You can have, this is economics 101, as much competition downstream, bazillion of small guys doing application. That will never disperse the power upstream. We've known it for decades, we've known it in utilities. You can have telcos, you can have a lot of MVNOs competing as resellers of telecoms, but it will not disperse the power of those who own the infrastructure. So, the focus needs to be there. And there, I'm afraid the news is it's too late. We are admiring the problem and totally incapable of doing anything about it. We have a handful of operators. We know who they are. And they have a collection of assets. Data lakes, GPU forests, operating systems, cloud, and money. And when you talk to them, because I know them, I talk to Microsoft, they say, we've got all of that, suck it up. Suck it up is the answer. No one can do anything about it because we've got the money. And not only that, we are actually buying all the little guys. Oh, yes. Our justification is there is this open source thing. We'll talk about open source in a minute. It's a complete myth. Okay? It's not going to disperse this power. But the reality is, this power exists. They are extending it. They are brazen about it. They're totally brazen. They have absolutely no apology. That's what they're doing. Look at what Satya Nadella is doing every day of the week. He's buying governments, one after the other. He's going to Indonesia. He's for $1 billion. He's going to Malaysia. He's for $1 billion. He's going to Thailand. He's for $1 billion. To Japan. He's come to the UK and said, Dear Mr. Sunak, Prime Minister, do you want your AI summit in Bletchley Park? We have a lot of lovely AI toys. We can take them to Berlin. We can take them to Paris. Do you think you want them in London? Because if you do, then you have to squash a CMA, okay? Squash flat. Go do vet clinics and funeral parlors. Don't do tech, because this is what's happening in London. So in London today, the CMA is admiring the problem, is writing reports. Oh, great. So we are all kind of, and is issuing, like yesterday, a decision on the Mistral thing, the Mistral interest. So you read that decision, you want to bang your head against the wall. You say, my cat knows that there wasn't a relevant merger situation there. Of course, you invest 70 million in Mistral. Is that a merger? It's not a merger. And the CMA earnestly writes, this is not a relevant merger situation. As I say, I have a very smart cat, but he knows there wasn't a merger going on. So who are they thinking we are? Well, they think we are fools because they are totally brazen about it, and there is absolutely no apology, and there's no stopping it. The regulators, the antitrust enforcers are late and useless. DMA make me laugh, okay? The tech companies are rolling around laughing at the DMA, saying, those jokers in Brussels. No bite. And so, okay, let's watch. I mean, I'll leave it there, but I'm not remotely an optimist.
Thanks, Christina. I think we understood that. So the question of power is always the elephant in the room. Luckily, we also have a lawmaker in the room. So perhaps, Kim, since you were heavily involved in the negotiations on the AI Act.
Yes, not on the DMA.
Not the DMA, no.
Good for you.
So it's not your fault. What can you tell us about how this idea of market concentration, upstream, downstream, has been affecting the lawmaking process, and does the AI Act try to address any of these problems?
No, the AI Act doesn't address this power or the market concentration, which I think actually is a good thing, because if you already see what a large chunk of legislation that was, if we would have added also the topic of market concentration, I don't know if we would ever have gotten through the process that already took so many years. However, it has been very core to the discussions, particularly at the end of the negotiations, of course, because Mistral and Aleph Alpha came on the market and said, or on the market as in the lobby market, and said, look at us, we are going to make sure that there won't be market concentration, that there will be alternatives, European alternatives, we are nice, we are ethical, we focus on privacy, and also, France said, if you don't make sure that we have these beautiful European alternatives, we will block the AI Act. Mistral is the thing that is going to save us. And how many months was it later? 2-3 months later, Mistral announced, we are going to go in a partnership with Microsoft, and everything we do will be on the Azure cloud. So yeah, it's quite interesting also that caused outrage mainly on the parties that are worried about this, and in the parties that have a bit more of a the market will solve everything kind of ideology. They were like, yeah, well, we did regulate them a little bit, so it's all fine. We don't have to worry about this. It's also just a little bit of money, so who cares? It's just not good for their image, and that's it. But this is really, really not how I see it. I think that this is a major mishap that has been done. I think this just means that they've been lying all along. I mean, a partnership like that doesn't happen overnight. So they knew all the time. It's also quite interesting that France was also already promised OpenAI, who's also working with Microsoft, that OpenAI said, we will put our headquarters in Paris. It's all connected. So they know. And I think it is very important that we try to address the market concentration. As I said, it's good we didn't do it in the AI Act because it would have been even more messy. But we really have to make sure that we really re-look at our competition law. The market leveraging should be part of competition law. we're so narrowly focused right now. I mean, I'm here with the super experts, so I don't have to elaborate too much, I think, because you already explained some part of it. But I mean, the fact that we don't even look at data power in competition law still today is absolutely bollocks. We have to really look at data power, data protection consequences. I mean, it's still mind-boggling. Like, I still cannot get over it, and it's been a while that the Google Fitbit merger has been approved. It's like, how? And also the DMA would not have stopped that probably. So I think that we have to have new discussions. I am optimistic that the new mandate of the European Commission and the European Parliament, we will discuss competition more, but whether things will change, that's where I'm less optimistic, because there is still the dream of the European champion that will rule the world. And if you want the European champion to rule the world, according to some in the European Parliament, particularly on the more right-wing conservative side, but also within the liberals, then you cannot have too many rules, because then they will never become as big as these massive companies that we have right now. So I think we really have a lot of work ahead of us. I'm happy we have an AI Act now, but this is just a start.
Right. So Kim mentioned the Mistral AI and Aleph Alpha debate, let's put it like that. Sebastiano, of course, you represent the smaller guys, the digital SMEs in Europe, and these are the companies that are usually suffering the most in a highly concentrated market. So how is this market concentration we have been talking about affecting European SMEs in relation to AI? And can you see anything that can help fix the problem?
Yes, thank you, Luca. Well, I heard many very interesting things, and it's music to my ears. Indeed, as representative of SMEs and startups, we are highly concerned with the structure of the market. If we want Europe to have its own alternative, its own indigenous, autonomous proposal for a technology, we cannot obviously just regulate. We have to have an industry in Europe. We have thousands and thousands of really extremely innovative companies, what we call the hidden champions, very active, especially in the B2B area, not particularly visible to the consumers, but we have a lot of innovation happening in Europe. We do miss, of course, these tech champions that you just mentioned. We believe, we are trying as an industry to produce our own alternative. Okay, we believe, of course, we don't have the tech champions. We have a highly fragmented ecosystem, and made by thousands of smaller companies, and only by putting their strengths together, we can create a technological alternative. And if they can work, together with interoperability in technological frameworks which are open and let everyone collaborate, we can create such alternative, which is probably going to be more human-centric and more sustainable. But having said that, yes, we have a highly concentrated market. We have, obviously, these companies, this handful of companies have, a dominance, as Christina said, due to cloud computing power, due to money, due to skills, due to infrastructure, etc., which is not letting everyone else, have a chance to try. And I like very, very much this conversation about what has happened with the AI Act. All this discussion has been somehow artificially, let me say, steered towards the safety issues. There was a risk everywhere. There is a risk everywhere. And no one looked into the very fundamental issue for the future of Europe, which is the fact that we don't have tech champions and we have a highly, highly concentrated market. This was not on the table. And if you look at how that conversation has gone, it's easy to say, okay, maybe this was a bit steered. And obviously the other issue was And therefore, because there are these risks, and which are so high, government have to work with us. They have to talk to us, to big tech, because we are the ones who own the technology, and we can solve the problem. We will have a closed garden model, which is maybe not so good in terms of market concentration, but at least we can control the risks, right? So forget about open source because this is too risky. Work only with us, and we will make sure we solve all the safety problems. And all of this, if you look at the AI Act, until the very last month or so, we had, the legislators had not thought about including the foundation models. Who had convinced them about it? This narrative that you cannot regulate technology per se because these foundation models are the problem. This is the risk, and they were not even in the scope. Come on. You see, we have been living in a fantasy world, not looking at the reality, and this is even more surprising, considering all the discussions, all the public debate that was taking on, was towards the end, on the DMA. Right? The DMA, I agree with Christina that now it's impossible to implement and we will need, a much more efficient and effective commission to do it, which unfortunately is not the case at the moment. But at least the spirit of the law was particularly good. It was looking at the concentration. And despite all that conversation, despite big tech really being scared about the DMA, they managed to get the AI Act completely, sidetracked on the issue of concentration. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I think this panel is super interesting because we are hearing a lot of important stuff.
But big tech is not scared about the DMA. They've known from the beginning that it was something that the Europeans were going to do. Let them do it. I know there are people in the audience that say, Christina, why do you attack the DMA? Guys, it's better than zero, but it's, very, very little. It will not succeed, not only because of implementation difficulties, but even in terms of its own design, to disperse the power. We are nibbling at the edges. So my phone is going to have the blue bubbles talking to the green bubbles. Whoa, that's super. I am so excited. How does that change the power of Apple or Microsoft or anyone? These regulations are next to useless, okay? Yeah. Let's not be delusional about it, because the market power is so entrenched and established and moated that there is no real way. Just as an expert in antitrust, let's not just get carried away. You get all this kind of silliness in this space in which our regulators, and I won't name names, do tweets with emojis. Who has ever seen that? Does Lina Khan do emojis with muscles saying, we in Europe are doing the DMA? And it's like, over there in Silicon Valley, people are rolling around saying, you are just so silly, but yeah, do the emojis. Come on.
Thanks, Christina. I think we all got your reference. And there is indeed the risk that the DMA becomes more of a facade than something that is actually consequential. But first of all, I think we need to give a bit of credit to the Parliament for having conceptualized the idea that foundation models, so the model side of things, should have been regulated. But Sebastian, I wanted to follow up.
Can I just say very quickly, Luca, just before we move on from this legislation conversation, just a short point to say, of course, I agree with Christina, and that's where I started this conversation, but I have just come from a month of, just last week, the Senator Schumer, that's the majority leader of the Democratic Party, and in the Senate, he kind of announced after almost a whole year of running these insight forums on AI, it was a kind of another roadmap and a really yet another reminder that there just isn't political will to move legislation in the US, not on basic issues like privacy or anything else. So I think, again, just to make concentration of power a broader issue than just the specifics of the DMA, I think what we are up against is an absolute resistance to any enforceable law, especially in the existential risk conversation. And so from that perspective, I think we should just hold that in the same breath, that whether it's the general purpose AI exception or it's anything else, Europe has been uniquely placed in at least being able to galvanize political will to move forward, and that shouldn't be put on a pedestal forever, or maybe at all, but it is something that feels like a very stark contrast coming from a jurisdiction right now which seems completely incapable of pushing forward anything in the version of
stuff
enforceable
which has
law.
got a hope of breakups, like
And the enforcers are filling the gap to the extent that they can, but I just think it's still worth saying that the will of the public doesn't seem to be translating into legislation, which is a major gap.
Okay, so I think we can go on and on to discuss this. But actually, that's a nice cue for my next question, because yes, in Europe we are good at making laws, but someone might remember that when the AI Act was proposed, it was proposed as a package, together with an AI innovation strategy that now is nowhere to be found, because the member states dragged their feet and the Commission dropped the ball, basically. Sebastiano, now we have a new innovation strategy for AI with these open ecosystems that you were also mentioning. Do you think what's your take on this latest proposal to open up supercomputers, which ideally should lower the entry barrier? Is that going to move the dial for digital SMEs in Europe?
Well, no, of course, I mean, we are very happy with the idea of these AI factories, supercomputers, and you know, even Mistral is actually trained in the supercomputer in Bologna in Italy. So, you know, maybe for the benefit of the Americans, but nevertheless, you know, it proves certainly the idea is good, and it's good to look at it, see the Commission is investing in that. But then the point really in the digital markets, and AI is just one of them, and it is, you know, where we have all the attention now, is we have a situation such that what are the chances for alternative companies to challenge these incumbents? What are really the chances? I mean, they have a dominance based on three elements. So you probably know this: technology, data, and money. Okay, and even if you are the most successful startup, and you have to secure the three of them, because if you have the best technology, much better than big tech have, and if you have secured all the money in the world, these guys will still have more data than you, and so they will crush you. If you have the data and the technology, somehow, they will certainly have more money than you, and so they will buy you out. And so the concentration of the market is the issue. This is the elephant in the room, because if we don't solve that, and I agree, now it's probably too late. I don't know how to do it, unless we are very, very bold. We won't have really anyone able to challenge these companies. This is what we see in the market.
Right. At the same time, we are seeing quite successful startups like Anthropic, Mistral AI, and we are going to discuss the partnerships later. But when we talk about market concentration, Max, what are the actual harms that we are looking at in this market?
I will answer that in a sec, but I kind of want to jump into also what people are talking about what we do about this. I want to be a little bit more optimistic. I mean, I agree with what Christina was saying. You know, this concentration isn't hypothetical. It's kind of here in front of us. It's not new concentration. It's concentration that has been built up over many, many years, you know, especially with computing power. And so it's an incredibly hard thing to unpick. But I do think there are things we can do already. So, I mean, to take the DMA, it's certainly not a silver bullet, but clearly, you know, the whole point of the DMA, right, was that we have a tool, unlike antitrust law, where you don't need to look backwards and prove that a company has done something anti-competitive. You can basically just say, you know, this behavior is prohibited and we're going to intervene to stop it. So theoretically, it could be something that you could use in AI to stop these companies from abusing their dominance. Now, yeah, in practice, you know, there are a lot of issues with the Commission's resources and just their kind of the way that they're enforcing it, which at the moment is very much being led by the companies rather than the Commission kind of showing the companies what they think enforcement, could be. But I think there is a role for the DMA here. I think in its current form, it's very backward-looking, unfortunately, even though, as I say, it was meant to be this forward-looking tool. If you look at the platforms that have been designated, the obligations in the DMA, they're very much focused on app stores, search engines, all these kind of things, and it's not really suited to these new technologies. So, for example, let's already think about updating the DMA, even though it's a new text. Let's think about adding foundation models to the DMA, cloud computing, which was actually in the DMA text. None of those, the big hyperscalers were designated, which is a massive oversight. Let's think about doing that. These are things that we could do relatively quickly. And we'll talk about the partnerships later, but for example, we have merger control laws. I think in some cases we could already use them to block some of these deals. For example, Microsoft OpenAI. Where we can't, maybe again, we need to look at updating these merger rules so that we can intervene and we can respond to a market that's changing, right? If these companies are saying, okay, we can't get mergers through, so instead we're going to have these kind of nebulous partnerships where we don't own the company, but we give them computing power and we get access to that technology, and we're kind of under the legal bar, then we need to deal with that. And then, I mean, on your harms question, I think in a kind of, from an economic perspective, there are plenty of harms that you can think about coming from this concentration in the technology stack. So I think I mentioned cloud computing. I think that's a very good example of where, because you have basically a small number of companies controlling this infrastructure, but who also have economic interests kind of beyond that infrastructure, and who, for example, run their own AI models on that infrastructure, or are partnered with firms who have AI models running on that infrastructure, then they have all kinds of incentives to, the stuff that we've seen in digital markets for a long time, to self-preference their own models, right? If you're using Amazon and they have their Bedrock service where they host different AI models, I think they have a very strong incentive to, basically rank their own model higher than others or things like that. So I think we'll see behavior like that. I think we also need to be worried about what you could call kind of gatekeeper rent seeking, again, which we've seen a lot in digital markets. So think about the Apple and the Google app stores and the way that those companies are able to extract, fees of 30% from app developers. And if we end up with a market, which it kind of looks like where we're going, where you have a small number of foundation models, and then people, as Christina said, building all these applications on top of that, well, obviously that gives the companies controlling those models a huge power to, for example, extract economic value from everyone building using their inputs. And I think, in a concentrated market, you're likely to see those rents go up over time. In the beginning, they might say, you can use our technology for free, or we'll take 5%. But then in 5 years, when they've locked down the market, they'll be taking more and more value. So I think we need to be worried about that. And then I think we just generally need to be worried about companies, because they control these inputs, again, like computing power, like data, using that as a tool of leverage to basically shape the market. So if someone's competing with them and they're worried about that, they shut off access to computing power, or they give secondary access and things like that. Similarly with data. So I think those are some of the practices that I think, some of them are already happening. I mean, we heard a couple of months ago that Microsoft was already threatening to cut off search rivals like DuckDuckGo if they used Microsoft's search index data to develop chatbots. But I think we'll see a lot more of that in the years to come if we don't actually deal with this concentration problem.
Right. I want to come back to that later. Christina, I saw you shaking your head.
Bursting here.
I see. Is it a matter of the current rules that are inadequate to address the problem, or is it a matter of how the rules are being applied?
Sorry, I was shaking my head so hard I thought it was going to fall off. Max, that mentality, that approach of saying, we've already got a few things, the regulation is doing something, let's hope, is exactly the problem we have in Europe. Because in Europe, the problem we have is that we've patted ourselves on the back for years saying the Brussels effect. Do you think anyone in the world gives a damn about the Brussels effect? No one cares. It is this notion that we somehow haven't got anything to export in the way of tech, but we export this vision of the world regulation, which has not actually done anything or made any difference anywhere in the world. It's just for Brussels officials to pat themselves in the back and swan around and think, or silly people writing books. Now, the reality is that antitrust by definition is an exposed instrument. We know that it doesn't deal with the future, it deals with the past. By design, it is something which is designed to effectively attack or somehow deal with market power. We know we had over a decade of attempted enforcement against big tech in Europe, which has failed spectacularly, because we are too useless to do remedies. What have we come out with? Oh, you can be in an auction with the bad guy. Okay, if that's going to do anything, I just don't know where to go. And then regulation, which is essentially, let's take all of the antitrust cases which have failed, let's condense the synopsis into rules, and thou shall not. Don't do this bad stuff, do this good stuff. And then the regulation is not too prescriptive, because we want the companies to comply. We want them to read the law and comply. We want to shift the burden of proof onto them to prove that they are complying. What is actually happening in this? Oh, and the Commission is going to have workshops. They're going to have workshops where the stakeholders are going to show up, and they're going to sort of say, hi, I'm so-and-so, and the Commission is going to serve tea, because no one is going to, they're not there to do anything else. And so the workshop happens, and then the companies do, well, this is my compliance report, haha. And the Commission says, okay. Complainants, what do you think? And they go, oh no, it's terrible, it's shock horror. Okay, then do it again. Maybe we'll do a non-compliance investigation on you, and maybe we'll fine you. And the companies say, okay, well, you know, if you don't like it, tell me what to do. No, we can't tell you what to do. We can't tell you what to do because this is not the spirit of the law. Just read the law and comply. Will you comply? I think I'm complying. Tell me no, why not? We can't tell you because we're not price regulators. You don't like the commission Apple charges? You don't like the 30%? Yes, we don't. So what should it be? I can't tell you. Figure it out. Okay, 27 then. You're malicious. You're malicious. You're not complying. I mean, this is a farce. It's a complete, utter farce. And the companies are not doing, not moving, not changing. So, two solutions, briefly, because, of course, I can be dystopian as you like, and I can go on. But, you know, what are we going to do? Antitrust isn't going to do it. I mean, unless in 2 years, maybe, the judge in the US comes up with a breakup order on search or ad tech. We'll see. Amazon isn't going to trial until 27, and Apple isn't going to trial until 2028. So nothing much is going to happen in the short term. Regulation is not going to be adopted in the US, so what are the solutions? One, somehow treat these businesses or parts of these businesses like telcos, common carriers, regulate very prescriptively what they can do on cloud, for example, such that it becomes an open and accessible way. Not a complete solution, but if you can't break out cloud, then regulate it as a common carrier. And two, I'm going to advertise my own event. Tomorrow I'm doing an event on digital public infrastructure. Come along at ACE venue. The idea is, if you do not succeed with access, because this is what we are talking about. We are talking about the new entrants getting access to these platforms. It's access competition. We know that that isn't real competition. We know it from telco. Access competition in telco is not real competition. You need asset competition. Cable companies building next cable. So unless we think about things like digital public infrastructure that might somehow create an alternative layers of the internet that are currently missing and that can be recreated, there are examples, not perfect, very imperfect. India, Taiwan. I mean, come on, let's do something different. Not this delusion that regulation is going to succeed. It's completely mind-boggling to me that we are talking about this.
Right. I want to follow up on this infrastructural aspect. Amba, so if you talk to a company like Anthropic, they will tell you, we are competing with Google's DeepMind, we are competing with Microsoft's own internal team on AI, and there is a competition with the big tech companies, because if one shuts us down, then they're losing market share, and we're going to go, if Amazon is shutting us down, we're going to go to Google. Unless everyone decides at the same time we're going to vertically integrate our AI models with the cloud infrastructure, we don't see a problem. And also Mistral AI announced, when they announced the Microsoft partnership, they said we are going to have more partnerships. So is that a sign that competition has been restricted to this handful of hyperscalers, or what does this mean for competition regulator?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are better competition experts on this panel, but here's what I can say to you is, one, I think there's been very, very inventive corporate spin, that blog post that Microsoft wrote that you just referenced. The whole blog post is essentially them saying that they are pro-competitive because they allow as many models to live on their cloud infrastructure platform. We allow the closed models, we allow the open models, we are the host body for whoever wants to play, and they refer to these as partnerships. And I think that if it hadn't been for the FTC and now several other regulators chiming in to say, just because these don't fit the kind of traditional idea of what is viewed as problematic under competition law, there is something fishy. There is something going on with these strategic partnerships that are creating relationships of influence and control. We can't put a kind of enforcement hook on it now, but there is something that makes it uncomfortable. And like, speaking of where there are pockets of hope, I think if regulators are I guess, have the ability to kind of, admit to the limitations of existing legal hooks, and yet say that there is something on the horizon that doesn't seem to fit traditional definitions, but is still raising concern. So a more imaginative adversarial application of existing law is something I think that can help just combat the corporate spin. And to your broader point, I think just to lay facts on the table, there is no scenario in the world, whether it's Anthropic or Mistral or Inflection AI or anyone else, whose path to profit doesn't eventually go through one of these companies, right? Because the access to the consumer, the access to the markets and to monetizable markets is through and exclusively through these big tech platforms. It's also true that the kind of hype that is being built around, or the hype that is already being fueled in AI, the kind of stock valuation bubble, all of this is primarily accruing in the form of kind of cloud profits to these three companies. These three companies accounted for 2/3 of the funding that went to AI startups, right? So they're not just, I think, our sort of aperture can't just focus on the three AI labs we've heard of in these companies. It's also the fact that the accumulation of capital and wealth that's happening in real time is giving the infrastructure providers a kind of unique way to shape the market as it's playing out, to pick winners and losers. So anyway, I really don't think that the writing is very much on the wall there, and I think the pocket of hope is that I think it is harder for Brad Smith to get away with a blog post where he argues that it's a world of partnerships and they're just one of the many partners in the ecosystem. I did just want to, before we leave the point, because the AI hack has come up again, and then we keep moving back to the DMA. Not to harp on this, but I do think there's a kind of, a shrewd cynicism, maybe even a hopelessness that's come through on this panel, just because I think when you do see the elephant in the room, it does feel pretty hopeless. But I think that if we are able to bring that reality check to not just the enforcement of the DMA, but to the enforcement of the AI Act and the DSA. These are issues that are going to be equally relevant for how evaluation and audits are happening under the AI Act. They're going to be equally relevant for the kind of DSA, third-party access researcher regime. So I guess my call to action while I have the floor is to say that these are not, it's too easy to silo concentration to be a competition problem. It is absolutely the regulatory paradigm that we're working with. And so if we can bring some of that hopelessness, cynicism, and really put a scalpel to how we're implementing these laws, I think that is another pocket of hope.
Yeah, just a brief rejoinder to that. I mean, I agree with that, but again, do not hope that antitrust is coming to the rescue. Antitrust is not going to save us when it comes to these partnerships, because the antitrust rules when it comes to mergers and agreements are very, very specific, and they're designed to be applied in a certain way. Plus, these companies are loyal to the back teeth. And so they go to this meeting, I've been in these meetings, and they completely overwhelm the regulator in terms of smartness, in terms of strategy. It's another game. You think about OpenAI, what has been the legal strategy? I can tell you what the legal strategy has been. This is not particularly a secret. 2019, first investment in $1 billion. Dear CMA, we've invested $1 billion in this company, but we're not acquiring control, so nothing for you to do. Okay. 2020, we've invested another $1 billion in this company, but we're not acquiring control, so there's no merger situation, nothing for you to look at. Okay. 2023, we've invested another $9 billion, but you could have looked at it in 2019, and you've run out of time now, ciao. So there's statute limitation, there's something you can do. So these companies are not scared. I know it. They are playing with the regulator. They're saying, we're going to see those dumb people over there. This is the position. There isn't a fear, because there's nothing the regulators can do in terms of enforcement of antitrust. Let's not kid ourselves. I absolutely know it. So then, I agree, I don't want to be, but anyone who is optimistic about this, to me, hasn't got a clue about how these relationships really work in terms of the reality of dealing between companies, their advisors, and regulators.
Right. I was going to turn to Sebastiano for a glimpse of hope, but you want to react to this one? Okay.
Yeah. Well, I want to react to you in general, because I think this is one of the things that we've been not talking about yet, which is going towards a glimpse of hope. So maybe I can also help to be the bridge there. No, because this is not this is one of the things that has utterly frustrated me, is that they're all talking about these European champions. The only way we can have European champions is by not having regulators. But how are we ever going to make sure we have European infrastructure? How can we make sure we have European companies that can actually thrive? And I think one of the things that has been extremely lacking in the discussion also in the European Parliament is, what can we do as Europe to make sure that we have European infrastructure? We're all the time talking about, that we have to be autonomous, that we have to be digitally sovereign, but we're fine that our big European cloud infrastructure is created by Amazon. Like where does this make sense? And I think the conversation is starting at least, but I think we really have to be more bold. And I think the first, the low-hanging fruit we have is at least to look at our public procurement. There's a high chance that the next mandate we can do something on public procurement. If we have already established that there are certain companies that are too big, why do we even put public money into them? That's a fundamental question we have to ask ourselves. And if we really, truly believe that we have to make sure we are sovereign, that we have our privacy in order, that we have ethical standards, I'm not sure if we can actually still, put public money into these companies.
Thanks, Kim. So last question to Sebastiano before I open the floor for questions from the audience. And it's actually a follow-up to this. So what I gather from this debate, and you can tell me if you agree or not, Sebastiano, is that there doesn't seem to be another path for a promising AI startup, but to partner up with these big tech companies because they need cloud infrastructure for training the models, for deploying them. So what is an alternative route, if there is even one, to partnering up with these companies?
If I had the answer, I would be a billionaire, of course. No, we have in the market, this is the situation we have in the market, and unless we are really able to work with our regulators in a clever way, understanding that we have a problem, that this is an absolute priority, we are not going to solve it. And I completely agree. I don't think we are very, very cynical and just pessimistic, because I think Christina earlier laid out, a few concrete options what can be done. I mean, if we start treating the digital platforms as the telcos in a highly regulated environment, then we can certainly, find ways to let others compete, right? I agree with you that as we have the DMA now, the spirit of the law is fantastic, but the implementation of the law is the problem. I was in Silicon Valley meeting in the headquarters of one of these companies, having a very frank conversation with them, and they told me, look, all your laws from Brussels, this is just paper, because we'll pay another lawyer, write another compliance report. We don't care. It doesn't cost anything to us. The only law, which is a bit problematic to us, because it really affects we have to change the design of our products, is the DMA. There was at least
The DMA?
The DMA, because the spirit of the law challenges the business model itself. Now, I agree with you that the problem with the DMA is the implementation, because unless it becomes particularly prescriptive and companies are told you can do this, this, and that, and you have to do it, what is happening now is that the Commission is reversing the burden to the others. They can go to Spotify and say, tell me what Apple proposes is correct. They can do this with Spotify to some extent. But can they really do this? They come to us and say, you represent thousands and thousands of SMEs. You need to tell me, if this proposal by Google or Apple is okay. But do you realize the damage they are doing to each single company is so small? And these companies don't have the resources. They will never, we will never be able to elaborate why and why yes and why no, and then alternative proposal. So, this is the job of the Commission. This is not the job of the companies. Come on, we are not there.
But
we are there to make money, to do business, not to regulate. They have to regulate. They cannot put the burden on us. And this is, so I like what you said.
There's this expression that says, plutes are going to plute. Okay? So plutocrats are going to make money. And that's what they're going to do. They're going to try and produce compliance report. They're going to pay lawyers in Brussels hundreds of thousands to produce another useless compliance report. Regulator is going to regulate. And this structure, which is not prescriptive, is not going to do it. Now, I think that what I am ultimately, the last thing I hope I will say is that I think that everybody in this room, civil society and all of you, need to really have the penny drop that this is the reality. And to compliment the Commission endlessly for their amazing DMA effort is sucking energy and oxygen out of the real question. There is a groupie, sort of community of people go, yay, DMA. And you think, are you actually thinking? Why instead of complimenting, kissing the ring and saying, it's wonderful what you're doing, we're now having a more muscular, aggressive, grown-up debate about these are the limitations of this thing. What do we do instead? I agree with Kim. The question is, what do we as Europeans do to actually improve our own position? We are contemplating the letter, the Draghi, the Macron report, all saying we are in a shit show. We are totally at the brink. We are over there. And we are still taming big tech. That's our sort of goal. We are taming big tech. They don't know if they're being tamed. They're saying, just bring the news. What are you doing? Because you ain't taming me. So instead of taming, which is not going to work, why don't we do something proactive? Invest. I mean, let Macron and Draghi at least say, we need public digital infrastructure. We need investment in public goods. We need fundamental tools on which European companies can build, not go and beg for access to the App Store. Come on. I mean, this is just so obvious. And we're here, and we are essentially moving the attention away. I would have loved to see in the last year a really serious grown-up debate in the community that said, this stuff is nice to have. Let the Commission do its thing. But it's not going to work. What are we seriously going to do? Instead, people beat up on me and say, Christina, you are so negative on the DMA. Wake up. Smell the coffee. This is the reality.
Sorry, I know we have to jump into Q&A, but just quickly to respond to that. I don't think we need to see like regulation and these other interventions we're talking about as mutually exclusive. You know, either you just have the DMA and these rules and you do nothing else, you sit back, or you know, I think we should see them as tools that can work together. Yes, the DMA has limitations, but we have it now. You know, it took a lot of work to get on the book, so why don't we try and use it as much as we can, including maybe by updating it, as I said. But certainly,
they're doing it. So
but I mean,
why
certainly,
can't the attention move elsewhere? Let them kind of do whatever they do. The question is, what next? To me.
well, sure. So, like I said, you know, let's use the DMA. Let's use, for example, our merger control rules, our rules to break up cartels, to look into some of these partnerships. But obviously, that is not going to improve really this problem of concentration. It will stop it getting worse. It might prevent these companies from abusing their dominance. But yeah, then I think if we really want to have a more open marketplace, actually have options for other firms outside of big tech, then yeah, we need to do things like public investment. You know, Kim was talking about public procurement. I think certainly, you know, more government contracts should be going to other firms, you know, OVH Cloud or people like that. You know, yeah, and let's look at, as others were mentioning, you know, and we called for this in a report we put out in November, treating the cloud as a utility, right? So that when you control that infrastructure, you can't then use that to steer the rest of the market and kind of pick who succeeds, who fails. I think all these interventions, I think they're important. But again, I don't think it's, you know, either regulation or those. Let's just do it all together.
What you just said reminded me what Andreas Mund said at Christina's conference earlier this year, that antitrust enforcement has at best managed to make digital markets fairer, but not more contestable. And I think that's perhaps the trend that we are starting to see with the DMA as well. So I saw we have a question from the room too. Okay, let's take from the back and then here. Let's take two.
Hi, Mark Dempsey, Archcantine. Oh God, I feel I have to stand up because I feel like I've got a lot to say, but I'm not going to go on for too long. Christina, I have to say you're a very, very good provocateur on the panel because you've got my pulse racing. So I worked for the Financial Conduct Authority back in the day, and you have to understand that regulators aren't visionaries. They don't look at a market 10 times or 10 years out and say, this is how we want to shape the market. A regulator looks at the market and says, what are the outcomes? How are we going to change how firms behave? And that's how the Commission is looking at this. So the Commission is not a visionary, and the Commission is actually more, how would you say, risk-averse than any regulator. There's a culture in the Commission which is terrified of being criticized. Yeah. So but they don't look out. They don't look at how they shape a market. So I think the DMA is about what kind of outcomes are we going to see? How will platforms change behavior? So if you want to have a visionary commission, you have to see the DMA almost fail. So I think there's an element of waiting to see what happens with the DMA. And then they think, okay, it's failed, we need to change the market. But they also need to be looking at this from a market concentration perspective. So as a CSO or as a collaboration of CSOs, we need to have a strategy about how we engage with the Commission. And this is where, Kim, you come in the Parliament. And I think we can do something in the next term. I don't think we're going to get an agenda from the Commission which is visionary, because we all know that. So we can all hope to Kingdom Come. We'll hope we have a great commissioner who's going to be visionary. We're not going to get that because they are risk averse. There's a culture there. It's embedded after decades. That's not going to change. So we need to be very strategic about how we approach things.
Thanks. I don't think I heard a question in there.
Sorry,
if
there wasn't a question.
No, it was a comment more than a
It was a
question.
statement.
But Mark, I agree with that, and you are right. But why don't we also agitate to see a different culture inside the Commission? I say this, and it's opprobrious. People are shocked when I say the Commission is a neoliberal institution. Everywhere in the US, we've gone past that. In the US, the debate is neoliberalism is dead, efficiency, lower cost, all of that is dead. We are in a post-neoliberal world. Here, we are in a world which is, well, you know, at least aspirational.
Yes.
You have Jonathan Cantor, who shows up at a conference yesterday and says, I'm here to represent the American people. When have we seen a European regulator saying, I'm here to represent the people? I'm here to just chat with the CEO of Microsoft, maybe.
Christina, national companies, sovereignty, that would cause ructions. The FTC has been hugely visionary and transformative what it's doing, remarkably so. A huge amount of admiration for it.
And I will
It is
also say
possible.
that
It
the
takes a certain
FTC is
leadership.
getting absolutely hammered for going after their national champions. So this is not, I think the
Yeah, but at
environment in
least
which they're
trying.
operating is.
I don't
yeah.
care if they're hammered. I mean, people will hammer you. You just kind of
But
charge
Christina,
along.
we can have an impact. We
but-
can
Sorry.
change things,
Can
but
I
it takes a
maybe-
certain approach.
Can you pass the mic along?
Yes,
Thank you.
and I also have a comment then and a call to all of you, because yes, I would love the European Parliament to be as visionary as many of the people here in the room, but the reality is that in June, hundreds of new MEPs are going to arrive who will get their presentations on the amazing laws that have been made, and will hear the narratives from the big tech lobbies that, and from the Commission. The only thing we have to focus on now is enforcement. We already did so much,
Yeah.
and we are going to solve everything, and now we have to wait and see how this is going to work out. We need also you all to tell those new MEPs that, we have a problem and that we have to look at different things. So please help me, because I can't do that on my own.
Well, to be fair, a lot of the European Parliament has, on many regards, been ahead of the curve. If we look at how the first idea to break up Google came up from the Parliament, if we read the competition to report from this year, it's very strong on AI too. Let's move on. We have one more question.
Yeah, Matthias Spielkamp from Algorithm Watch. So, Kim, we are happy to help. First question, though, is, and I like the idea personally very much, and I've said so for many times, also on, not AI, but also cloud and all these things about procurement. But the thing is, when you say, there are all these companies that we sort of dislike, why, and who are dominating the market already, why do we give them money? Well, because it would be illegal not to do so, because we have procurement law that says you need to put out a tender, and you need to look at the offers, and there are all these very, very complicated structures to evaluate them, and then in the end, you can't say, oh yeah, let's have that European company, because we really don't like what Microsoft does and what Satya Nadella says, or Brett Smith, or whoever. So how are you going to change that?
Well, if we change the public procurement regulation, which is heavily needed, also when it comes to social affairs, also when it comes to the environment, and also very much when it comes to digital, I mean, we can make sure that municipalities and governments say, okay, we want to make sure that the privacy of our citizens is well protected. It is not if you put the data of your citizens on the cloud of an American company. Simple as that. So if we make sure they can do that, then we have to make sure. But my favorite thing would be if we say that the gatekeepers from the DMA cannot be even part of the tenders.
But we had Gaia X, we let it fail. Why? You had Gaia X, which was a European cloud, and in principle a good idea. I know the guy who was the CEO, he had to resign because he said they set me up to fail. There's nothing there that I could do to herd these cats. Yeah. But we have cloud companies in Europe. Why don't we support a collective of cloud company providing an alternative? There are people who are doing it in Italy.
No, but they were ready. The Commission even went that far to make the time so short that any alternative from massive tech couldn't even put forward the tender. I mean, I'm the last person to defend Gaia X, but I think we have to change public procurement, and I think this is one of the things that maybe this is not the first thing on your mind, but the public procurement regulation is going to be crucial if we want to do anything still in Europe when it comes to technology.
Right, we have one more question here.
Hi, I'm Corey Kreider from Foxglove. I'd like to hear a little bit more about an area which it feels like everybody on the panel agrees, which is utility regulation for cloud. So what is the right on-ramp for that? Because I've heard some comments that suggest that litigation and enforcement-based actions are going to take too long, but then I think in the UK, well, we had a little bit of that with BT and OpenReach, right? There was at least some common carrier-like formal separation that's policed by Ofcom now. So what is the appropriate on-ramp to that? Like how if we all agree that it should happen, how do we get it done?
Max?
Well, I think it depends on the jurisdiction, right? So in the US, for example, they have this history of common carrier regulation. There's a lot of precedent for that. And they've used it in lots of other areas where you have kind of utility-style characteristics. And so I think they could probably draw on that. I think in a European context, you'd basically just need to apply regulation, essentially, that applies to these companies and then just says, you have this special status in the economy as cloud providers, you provide this essential infrastructure that everyone else needs to bring their product to market, and so you have to treat people equally. You have to make sure you have transparent and fair pricing. You can't discriminate.
But that's the outcome. That's the wish list. How do we get there? So at the moment, there is a cloud investigation in the UK by Ofcom and the CMA. In the end, it's a question of regulators' appetite and ultimately political appetite for that. The Ofcom people are very deserving people, and the CMA people are decent people. Will they be able to say to Microsoft and Amazon and Google, we're going to regulate you like a utility? It depends on who's at number 10. Because who's at number 10 is going to tell them what to do, like it or not. In the days before this is the reality. France, there is another investigation of cloud. Who in the Commission is going to? So what is the legal route to that? There needs to be an investigation. An investigation lasts average 10 years, and then you need to have remedies. How are you going to do that? That's the real question. Unless we really muscle up in some way. But the reality of doing this stuff is not seriously possible.
I was just going to say that I think because the path to remedies via litigation in the US is just such a long one, outside of that, I think there's a sort of building momentum for a legislative campaign, and of course the prospects for that are as good or as bad as everything else, for a kind of clearer structural separation regime, which is if you own the cloud, you don't play in any other market. Not just AI related, because that doesn't really mean anything, and that's not future-proof. You can't own a gas station. You can't do anything else. If you own cloud as an infrastructure provider, you stay in that lane. And of course, there's like many issues to deal with that spring from that. But I think in terms of putting out a bold vision that seems to get at where power might actually shift in this market, I would put that up there.
Right. We have a final question. Please be concise.
Sure. Hi, Farid Masouli, Radboud University. I have a question. I mean, you mentioned data power. I mean, maybe the question is more for the right side of the table. You mentioned data power. So one of the way, I mean, I work on the health data space regulation, and basically, I mean, the EU is going to, unveil all of those data spaces progressively, and that comes with making new standards, new norms. And of course, I mean, we know very much that, when it comes to lobbying and making those, well, big tech is at the table mostly. So don't you think that that would be, I mean, that's what I'm studying, basically. Do you think that there's an avenue? I mean, I see there's hope in that, like a pocket of hope, as you said, in being harsh and, regulating that aspect, lobbies, standard setting, because that's where basically the codes are being written, and that's in the hand of big tech. What do you think about that?
I'm trying to think about how that's a pocket of hope, but I was just going to say that the standard setting and auditing space has, I mean, we have a whole decade more of history to show that those are the spaces that are most susceptible to complete kind of corporate control. I think just because you're working on healthcare, I will say that what Microsoft is doing right now in the healthcare assurance space is really something to watch for. I don't know that a lot of people are following that. They're sort of becoming the dominant player, setting the standards that will then define all of these concerns in the AI Act, whether that's bias, safety, or anything else, in ways that entirely, line up with their organizational priorities. And then they're also becoming the de facto regulator because of their control of CHAI and all of these other bodies. So just to say, if you're working in that space, again, an example of how I think concentration of power as a lens can really thread through these other domains and standards would be up there.
But in the end, the last thing I'll say is that this is a matter of regulator posture, okay? So regulators who go there, go to dinners at the Tour Eiffel with lawyers, are not going to change the world. This is the reality of regulators today, the current people in the Commission. So in the US, you have, I confess I'm an admirer of Lina Khan, of Jonathan Kanter. Whether they succeed or not is another matter. But there is a posture, which is we are enforcing. We are out there for the people, to the people. Not we are having dinners with, you know, the lawyers community at GCR with pay-to-speak speakers at conferences. Do you know that everybody who shows up at these conferences pays to speak? Do you think you look at the programs of GCR and Concurrence that these are deserving speakers from law firms and economics? No, they pay 10 grand to be at that panel on that morning. So, and you are a regulator and you show up on these charades, and so that is the culture, that is the environment. I've come from that world, so call me a whistleblower, but that's what it is.
Thanks, Christina. I think we will close on that note. I really hope these discussions are planting a seed for a change of approach at the regulatory level. I think there is a sort of consensus that there is a problem. Now the matter is what we do about it. So please join me in thanking the speakers for today's panel.